Welcome to Sleepy Harbor. Let your shoulders come down from wherever they've been holding all day. There's nothing here you need to follow, nothing you need to keep track of, nothing you have to remember in the morning. In fact, that last part is the whole point of tonight, because tonight we're going to spend a few slow hours inside the one thing your mind refuses to hold on to. The one experience that slips through your fingers every single night, no matter how tightly you try to close them around it. So settle in. Get the blanket the way you like it. Let the light be low, and let me tell you a true story about a group of people who could not remember, and about a game made of falling blocks, and about the strange and beautiful gap in your own mind where the moment of falling asleep is supposed to live, and doesn't. Let me start with the impossible thing, because it really did happen in a real laboratory to real people, and it is one of the strangest facts I know about what it is to be a person. At Harvard Medical School, around the turn of the millennium, a researcher named Robert Stickgold and his colleagues ran a study that ended up published in the journal Science in the year 2000. The setup sounds almost too simple. They had people play Tetris. You probably know it, or at least your hands do, that old game of falling shapes, the long bars and the squares and the little crooked pieces that tumble down from the top of the screen and have to be turned and slotted into place before they land. People played it. They played it for a while, over a couple of days, the way you'd play any game that gets its hooks into you. And then, when those people lay down to sleep, something happened at the very edge of sleep, right in that soft, blurred place where the room starts to loosen and go far away. They saw the blocks. As they drifted down toward sleep, behind their closed eyes, the falling shapes came back, tilting, dropping, rotating in the dark. The day's game, replaying itself on the inside of the eyelids in that last hallway before sleep. Now, on its own, that's a lovely little curiosity. Most of us have felt some version of it. You spend a whole afternoon doing one repetitive thing, weeding a garden, driving a long straight highway, scrolling, sorting, stacking, and then you close your eyes that night and the thing comes back, playing on a loop you didn't ask for, the mind rehearsing the day as it lets go of it. That part, by itself, is only gently interesting. But here is the part that turns the whole thing over. Some of the people in that research weren't ordinary sleepers. Some of them were patients with a specific kind of amnesia, people with damage to a particular structure deep in the brain. And because of that damage, they could not form new lasting memories. They could play the game, they could sit there and turn the falling pieces and slot them into the rows, but afterward they could not remember having played it at all. If you asked them, they'd tell you honestly they had never seen the game before in their lives. The whole session, gone, wiped clean as if it had never happened, because the machinery that would have written it down was broken. And yet, when those same patients lay down and closed their eyes and drifted toward sleep, they saw the falling blocks too. Sit with that for a moment, slowly, because it's worth sitting with. Here were people who had no memory of ever playing the game, who would swear to you they'd never touched it, whose minds held no record of the afternoon at all, and their sleeping brains still reached back and pulled up the tumbling shapes and played them out against the dark. The experience had left a trace somewhere in the part of them that dreams the day back, even though the part of them that keeps a diary had recorded absolutely nothing. They lived it without keeping it. They saw it again without ever having remembered seeing it the first time. That is the door we're walking through tonight. Because that single result quiet as it looks, is the proof of something enormous, something that touches you personally, right now, lying there. It tells us that the part of your mind that experiences your life and the part of your mind that records your life are not the same part. They are two different systems. They run on different machinery, and, crucially, they can be switched on and off separately. You can have the experience without the recording. And that, as we'll see over these next slow hours, is the whole secret of why you cannot remember falling asleep. Not because falling asleep is forgettable, because of when the recorder stops. But I'm getting ahead of myself, and there's no hurry at all tonight. Let me set the frame gently, and let me ask you a small thing while we're still near the start. Wherever you are right now, whatever dark or half-dark room you're lying in, whatever hour it is where you are, I'd love to know. If you feel like it, before you drift too far, leave a comment and tell me where in the world you're listening from tonight. It's a strange and comforting thing to think of all of us scattered across the map, in different time zones, under different ceilings, all doing this same quiet thing at the same time. And if you're new here, if you've just found this harbour, you're welcome to stay. A soft tap on subscribe keeps these long, slow stories coming. So there's always another one waiting for you the next time the night feels too big to face alone. That's all. You don't have to do anything else. You can let your eyes close whenever they want to from here on out. Now let me give you the number, because the number is where the wonder really starts to open up. Think about how many nights you've been alive. Not in some vague way, but actually. A year holds around 365 nights, and across a long human life, all those years stack up, and the arithmetic is simple enough to do slowly in the dark. 25,000 nights. 30,000 nights. More, if you're lucky and the years are kind. Somewhere in that range sits the number of times a person falls asleep across a full life. 25 to 30,000 times, at the very least, you have lain down and let go and crossed over from being awake to being asleep. 25,000 times. Maybe more. And here is the thing I want you to hold, softly, like something warm. You have never once seen it happen. Not a single time. Out of all those thousands of crossings, you have never caught the moment itself. You've caught the run-up to it, sure, the yawning, the heaviness, the thoughts going loose and strange. And you've caught the far side of it, the waking, the surfacing, back into the room in the morning. But the actual instant, the crossing, the precise point where awake became asleep, that you have never witnessed. Not once in your whole life. It's the most repeated experience you will ever have, and it's the one experience you have never observed. You've done it tens of thousands of times, more faithfully than almost anything else you do, and you have never seen your own face at the moment it happened. Isn't that a strange thing to be true about yourself? There is an event that happens to you every single night, that you go through every single night, that is as much a part of your life as breathing, and you have never been present for it. You leave the room before it starts. Every time. And I want to be careful here, because you might be thinking, well, of course, it's called sleep. You can't be awake to watch yourself fall asleep. That's a bit of a trick, isn't it? A little riddle, like asking someone to describe the colour of a room with the light off. But it isn't a trick, and it isn't a riddle, and this is the part that makes it genuinely one of the strangest facts about being a person. The reason you can't remember falling asleep is not the obvious reason. It's not simply that you were unconscious. Something much more specific and much more surprising is going on, and it's a mechanical thing, a real physical sequence, happening in a real order, in the wet, dark tissue behind your eyes, right now, as you lie there getting heavier. Because here is the thing that isn't dreaming, and I want to plant this gently and let it grow through the whole night. There is one event that happens to you every single night that you have never once witnessed. And it isn't the dream. Everyone thinks the mystery of sleep is the dream, the strange films that play in the deep of the night. But the dream isn't the unwitnessed thing. Plenty of people remember dreams, catch fragments of them, wake with them still clinging on. No, the truly unwitnessed thing, the event no human being has ever managed to observe in themselves, sits earlier than the dream. It sits right at the doorway, it's the crossing itself. And by the end of these slow hours, I want you to understand exactly why the crossing is invisible. Not to your eyes, but to your memory. And why it has to be, and what that means about the version of the night you'll carry into tomorrow. Let me say the heart of it now, plainly. And then we'll spend the rest of the night walking around it slowly, from every side, the way you'd walk around some old buried thing with a lamp, looking at it from one angle and then another. The reason you cannot remember falling asleep is that the part of your brain that records your experiences shuts down before the part of your brain that has the experiences does. That's it. That's the whole engine of the mystery, right there. Two systems, one that lives the moment and one that writes the moment down. And they do not switch off at the same time. The writer clocks out first. The writer packs up, turns off the lamp, and goes home, while the rest of the mind is still awake, still drifting, still seeing the falling blocks, still hearing the room, still having a genuine lived experience, an experience that is simply, quietly, not being recorded by anyone. The lights in the house are still on. But the person whose job was to keep the diary has already left the building. The recorder switches off before the lights do. Let that phrase settle into you, because we're going to come back to it again and again tonight, like a tide coming back to the same stretch of sand. The recorder switches off before the lights do. It means that the moment of falling asleep isn't forgotten, in the way you forget where you left your keys, or the name of someone you met at a party. Forgetting implies you once had it and lost it. But you never had the moment of falling asleep at all. It was never written down. There's nothing to forget, because there was never a record to begin with. The experience happened. Every night the experience happens. Your mind drifts and loosens and lets go, and all of that is genuinely lived by you. It just isn't kept. It goes straight through you like water through open hands, real and warm and gone, leaving no trace behind for the morning to find. And once you understand that, once you really feel the shape of it, a whole set of ordinary nighttime mysteries suddenly click into place, one after another, like tumblers in a lock. It explains, for instance, why the last thing you remember before sleep is never quite the last thing that actually happened. There's always that little gap, isn't there? You remember lying there, thinking some drifting half-thought, and then nothing, and then it's morning. But between that last thought you can recall and the actual moment sleep took you, there was more. There were more seconds. More thoughts, probably, maybe a shift of position, a hand moving, a strange image floating up. All of it lived, none of it recorded. Your last memory isn't the last thing that happened. It's just the last thing the recorder caught before it clocked out for the night. It marks where the writing stopped, not where the living stopped. And those are two different places, seconds or even minutes apart, and in that gap between them is a stretch of your own life that you were fully present for and will never, ever get back. And it explains something even stranger, something that I promise we'll get all the way to before the night is over, and it involves people who are at this very moment in sleep laboratories around the world, sleeping. Actually sleeping. There are machines strapped gently to their heads, reading the electricity of their brains, and those machines are showing, in clear ink, hours of sleep. Real, measured, unmistakable sleep. And when you wake those people up and ask them how they slept, some of them will look at you and tell you, with total sincerity, with complete conviction, that they didn't sleep at all. Not a wink. Not a single second. They'll swear it to your face. And they are not lying to you, and they are not confused, and there is nothing wrong with their honesty. They genuinely believe they were awake the whole time. And the reason they believe it, the reason they can be so certain and so wrong at once, comes straight from the same simple fact we started with. The recorder was off. Their brains were sleeping, but the part that would have written down the sleeping had already gone quiet. So when they woke and reached back for a record of the night, they found nothing there. And a night with no record feels, from the inside, exactly like a night, with no sleep. Emptiness reads as wakefulness. The absence of a memory feels identical to the absence of the thing itself. We're going to spend real time with those people later, gently. Because if you are someone who lies down night after night and gets up in the morning feeling like you never really went under, feeling like you spent the whole dark stretch just lying there, awake with your eyes shut, then those people in the sleep labs are your people, and what happened to them is almost certainly happening to you. And it is not what you think it is. And it is going to be, I hope, an enormous relief. But that's for later. There's no rush to get there. Let it sit at the edge of the night, like a light you can see, but don't have to walk toward yet. For now, let's stay here at the doorway, and let's go slow, because everything in this story rewards going slow. I called them two systems, the one that lives and the one that records, and I want to make them real for you. Because right now they might sound like a nice metaphor and nothing more. But they aren't a metaphor. They are two actual physical arrangements of tissue and electricity in your head, and we know they're separate for a very concrete reason. We know it because of what happens when one of them breaks and the other one doesn't. Deep inside your brain, tucked down on each side, curled up small, there's a structure that does a very particular job. Its whole purpose, or one of its central purposes, is to take the moments of your life as you're living them and stitch them into lasting memory. To take the fleeting now and file it somewhere it can be found again tomorrow and next week and years from now. Without it, moments still happen to you. You still see and hear and feel them, but they don't get filed. They arrive, and they pass, and they leave nothing behind. This structure is the recorder. It's the diarist. It's the one whose early departure, every single night, steals the moment of falling asleep out from under you. And we know how central it is to memory because of what happens to a person when it's gone. There was a man, and for most of his life the world knew him only by two initials, to protect his privacy, so I'll call him that too for now. He had, in his younger years, an operation on his brain meant to help with a serious medical problem, and in the course of that operation, the structures we're talking about, the recorders on each side, were largely removed. The problem it was meant to fix, it did affect. But it left behind something that nobody had fully anticipated, something that would make this man one of the most studied and most important people in the entire history of understanding the mind. because after that operation, he could no longer form new lasting memories. At all. And I want you to understand exactly what that did and didn't mean, because it's the whole crux of tonight's story. It did not mean he became unconscious, or vacant, or absent. Far from it. He was awake. He was alert. He could hold a conversation with you. A real one, warm and coherent and present. He could think. He could reason. He could hold an idea in his mind for a little while, turn it over, work with it. He was, by every measure of the passing moment, a fully conscious, fully experiencing human being. If you walked into the room and sat down with him, you would have a genuine exchange with a genuine person who was completely there. And yet, if you left the room and came back a few minutes later, he would not remember that you had ever been there. The whole conversation, gone your face, unfamiliar again, as if for the first time. The researchers who worked with him for years, who came to know him deeply, who sat with him again and again across a large part of his life, he met every one of them as a stranger, every single time. Among those researchers were Brenda Milner and later Suzanne Corkin, who studied him for decades, and to whom, decade after decade, he remained a person meeting them for the first time. He experienced his life fully in each passing moment, and kept almost none of it. The living worked perfectly, the recording did not work at all. Do you see what that man proved, just by being who he was? He proved that experiencing and recording are two different machines. Because in him, one was running beautifully, while the other was silent. He was the living, breathing, conversing demonstration that you can be fully conscious, fully awake, fully present in the moment, and record none of it. Awake, and not writing anything down. The exact same combination, it turns out, that your own brain enters every single night as you cross into sleep. He lived, permanently and in daylight, in the state you pass through briefly every night in the dark. Awake enough to experience, not equipped, in that moment to remember. And this is why the Tetris result we started with lands the way it does. Why it's the load-bearing stone under this whole night. Because those amnesic patients, the ones who couldn't remember playing the game, they had the same kind of damage. Their recorders were down, just like his. That's why they couldn't remember the afternoon of playing. And yet the falling blocks still came to them at the edge of sleep, which means the part of the brain that generates that drifting imagery, that plays the day back against the dark, is not the recorder. It's a different system entirely. It kept running. It reached back and found the shape of the day and played it out even in people whose recorders had been silent the whole time. The experiencing system and the recording system pulled apart, laid on the table side by side, one working, one not, and the working one still dreaming the falling shapes into the dark. Experience without memory, proven in a laboratory twice over. Once by a man who could converse with you and never keep you. And once by a group of people who saw the blocks fall behind their eyes and never knew they'd ever seen a block at all. So when I tell you that you cannot remember falling asleep because your recorder shuts off before your consciousness does, I'm not offering you a pretty theory. I'm describing the same split, the same two systems coming apart that we can see plainly in those patients. The only difference is that in you, in a healthy sleeper, the split isn't permanent and it isn't caused by damage. It's temporary, and it's scheduled, and it happens on purpose, softly, every night. As you drift down towards sleep, the recorder winds down first. It gets slower and quieter and less able to file anything new, and then it goes still, while the rest of you is still up and about, still drifting through those last strange loosening minutes, still, perhaps, watching falling blocks or falling anything against the inside of your eyelids, having a real experience that no part of you is bothering to keep. And that's why the moment is invisible. Not because nothing happens. Everything happens. You're right there for all of it. But the one witness who could have told you about it in the morning left early, turned off the lamp, and went home before the interesting part even began. Now I've handed you a lot to hold already, so let me set some of it down at the edge of the night, like small lights on the water, and we'll come back to each one slowly, in its own time, over the hours ahead. Don't try to keep them, just notice them glowing there and let them be. There's the impossible thing at the edge of sleep. The falling blocks in the minds of people who could not remember the game, which we've touched but not fully turned over yet, and which has more inside it than we've reached. There are the people in the sleep labs, sleeping for hours and swearing they never slept a second, whom we'll sit with when the time is right, and who will, I think, hand a certain kind of tired person a gift they've been needing for a long time. There's that gap I mentioned, the space between the last thing you remember and the last thing that actually happened, the dark tale of unwritten seconds at the end of every day, which we'll measure and walk into before the night is over. And there's the doorway itself, the actual threshold state you pass through, that soft, blurred country between awake and asleep, with its drifting images and its rolling eyes and its sudden falling jolts, which has a name, and a texture and a set of very real things happening inside it that we'll explore inch by inch, slowly, with the lamp held low. But you don't have to walk toward any of those lights tonight. That's the whole point of this harbour. The story will come to you. You can let it wash over you at whatever depth you like. If you stay awake for all of it, wonderful, we'll go the whole way together. And if you slip under somewhere in the middle, if you cross that invisible threshold while I'm still talking and never notice you've done it, that's wonderful too. In fact, if you fall asleep before this is over, you'll have proven the entire point of the story with your own body, quietly, in the dark, without ever witnessing it. You'll cross the very threshold we've been circling, and you won't feel it happen, and in the morning you won't remember the crossing, and you'll wonder, maybe, where the story went, and where you went, and the answer will be the same answer for both. The recorder simply stopped, softly, and the rest of you drifted on. So there's no wrong way to do this. There's nothing to get right. Let me keep the lamp lit, and let me keep my voice low and even, and let me carry you slowly deeper into this thing, the one event you've lived tens of thousands of times and never seen. Because I meant what I said. This question sounds small. Why can't I remember falling asleep? It sounds like the kind of idle thing you'd wonder about for half a second and then forget. But underneath it is one of the strangest true facts about what it is to be a conscious creature. There is a nightly event that happens to every single human being who has ever lived. Every one of them, all the way back. Every person in every age, in every bed and every cave and every field where a tired body ever lay down. Every one of them crossed this threshold, thousands of times each. Billions of people, trillions of crossings. And not one of them, in all of human history, has ever witnessed their own. It is the most universal experience there is, and it is completely, perfectly private, hidden not just from others, but from the very person living it. Hidden by the simplest of mechanisms. The recorder switches off before the lights do. And there's a real tenderness in that, I think, once the strangeness of it softens into something warmer. Every night, your mind gives you an experience it has no intention of letting you keep. It doesn't do it to hide anything from you. It does it because that's simply how the machinery lets go. Letting go means the recording stops. And so, faithfully, every night, you are given a few minutes of your own life that are yours to live and not yours to keep. A small stretch of drifting. Private, unremembered existence, right at the threshold that belongs to no one but you and that even you will never see. It's the most intimate thing that happens to you all day, and you're not invited to remember it. We'll spend the rest of these hours going gently into that threshold, into what your brain is actually doing as it winds the recorder down, into the strange images that visit you there, into the little jolt that sometimes throws you back at the last second, into the people who lost whole nights of sleep to this same soft mechanism and never knew it, and into the deep, quiet reassurance that lives on the other side of understanding it. And through all of it, that one phrase will keep coming back like the tide. The recorder switches off before the lights do. For now, though, just rest. You don't need to hold any of it. Let the words go through you the way the night goes through you, warm and passing and leaving no weight behind. You're doing beautifully. You've already begun the descent, whether you can feel it or not, and there's a good deal of gentle dark still ahead of us, and nothing at all you need to do but let it come. Let your breathing lengthen, if it hasn't already. Let the room go soft at its edges. And stay with me here at the doorway a little longer, because there is so much more to see in the low light. And we are only just beginning to understand the machinery of the vanishing, the quiet clockwork of how a mind lets go of a day, and of why the very last thing you'll remember tonight is already, right now, not going to be the last thing that actually happens. There is a man who can tell you what year it is, who can look you in the eye and have a conversation, who can laugh at a joke and shake your hand and express preferences and opinions and hold his end of a discussion with apparent fluency and warmth. If you leave the room and come back 10 minutes later, he will have no memory of having met you. He will greet you again as a stranger. If you leave and come back 100 times, you will be a stranger 100 times. No matter how fond he becomes of you in each individual 10-minute window, no matter how many times you've already spoken, no matter what was said or felt or shared between you. His name was Henry Molaison, and for more than half a century he was one of the most studied people in the history of neuroscience, not because of what he could do, but because of the single, precise, extraordinary thing he could not do, which was make a new memory last. And when you begin to understand what happened to Henry Molaison and why, and what researchers like Brenda Milner and Suzanne Corkin learned from decades of working with him, something opens up in the question we started with tonight, some quiet passage in the floor of it. And you can feel the whole shape of the answer waiting on the other side. Henry Molaison had surgery in 1953 at the age of 27 to address severe epilepsy that had not responded to medication. The surgery removed a structure deep inside both sides of his brain, a curved, seahorse-shaped region called the hippocampus. The operation largely achieved what it set out to do in terms of the epilepsy. It also achieved something nobody had anticipated. It severed, completely and permanently, Henry Molaison's ability to form new episodic memories, memories of events, of encounters, of experiences, of anything that happened to him after the date of the surgery. His memories before the operation remained substantially intact. His personality remained intact. his intelligence remained measurably intact. His ability to hold something in his mind for a brief window, to repeat a phone number back to you, to follow a sentence to its end, remained intact. What was gone was the ability to move a new experience from that brief window into anything lasting. Each 10-minute conversation was complete in itself, and then it was as though it had never happened. Brenda Milner, working with Henry Molaison in the years following his surgery, made observations that were foundational to everything that came after. Observations that neuroscience had not previously had the clinical clarity to make. She documented, carefully and over years, the precise architecture of what he had lost and what he had kept. He could still learn certain kinds of skills. If you had him trace a shape while watching his hand in a mirror, a strange and counterintuitive task that normally takes practice, he improved at it across sessions in the way anyone would improve. The mechanical learning lodging somewhere other than the hippocampus, somewhere that had been left intact. But he had no memory of the sessions. He improved at the task by some other route entirely, a route that didn't run through the structure that had been removed, and so the skill arrived in his hands without any accompanying story. He could get better at something he didn't remember doing. Suzanne Corkin spent decades in sustained work with Henry Molaison, studying him until his death in 2008. And what accumulated over those years was not just a clinical record, but a kind of proof. A proof that the brain houses two genuinely separate operations, genuinely distinct systems when it comes to the business of experience and memory. One system has the experience, another system writes the record of it. And in Henry Molaison, the second system had been removed, leaving the first intact. He was awake. He was present. He was, by many ordinary measures, a sociable and pleasant person to spend time with. He was simply not recording. The experience was happening. The hard drive had been taken out. Now hold that image gently, because it matters more than it might immediately seem. Henry Molaison's situation was extreme, the result of specific surgical intervention to a specific structure. But what he showed the world was a principle, not just a case study. He showed that being conscious of something and forming a lasting memory of something are not the same event. They are not even the same system. They run in parallel, under normal circumstances, so smoothly that we never notice the seam. When the seam was finally exposed in him, what it revealed was that all of us are always running both systems simultaneously, every waking hour, the experiencing and the recording happening side by side, and that we simply assume, because the two always coincide, that they are one thing when they are two. The hippocampus, the structure removed from Henry Molaison, is the brain's gateway for episodic memory, the memory of what happened, when, in what order, and in what context. It does not store the memories itself, not in the long run. What it does is perform the critical initial work of encoding, of taking in a new experience and beginning the process of converting it into something the rest of the brain can eventually hold on to. Information arrives through your senses and passes into short-term working memory, where it lives briefly, held in a kind of temporary buffer, a scratch pad that the mind keeps active for seconds, sometimes a handful of minutes at most. Working memory is real, and it is useful, and it is what allows you to follow a sentence, to hold a name you just heard long enough to write it down, to keep track of what you were doing when something else interrupted you. But it is transient by design. It is not a record. It is a relay. For anything to survive beyond that relay, the hippocampus must take it up, must begin the consolidation process, must start the long, iterative work of folding the new experience into something the neocortex, the vast outer layer of the brain, can eventually store and retrieve. This process is not quick. It involves something called hippocampal neocortical consolidation, a back-and-forth dialogue between the hippocampus and the broader brain that happens in waves over hours and days, and that during sleep takes on a particularly active form. During sleep, the hippocampus generates what are called sharp wave ripples, brief coordinated bursts of neural activity, and these ripples are believed to be the mechanism by which the day's encoded experiences are packaged and transferred, replayed and reinforced, sent from the hippocampal holding area outward into the cortex for longer storage. They are, in a loose but not inaccurate sense, the brain's nightly dispatch, the process by which today becomes part of the structure of what you know. But all of that consolidation, all of those ripples and transfers, can only move forward what was encoded in the first place. Sharp wave ripples cannot ship what was never loaded onto the relay. And what is in working memory at the moment the hippocampus begins to disengage, what is held in that brief buffer in the seconds and minutes just before sleep fully claims the brain, that material never makes it to the relay. Working memory holds on for its brief window, and then the window closes, and whatever was there drains quietly away. Not moved, not packed, not sent, just released. And because it was never sent, it leaves no trace. Not a faint trace, not a slightly blurry trace, not a trace that degrades with time, no trace at all. This is the first layer of the answer to where the falling asleep moment goes. It goes nowhere. Because nothing was sent. The experience was real. The final minutes of wakefulness were real. Every drowsy thought, every small sensation, the warmth of the room or the weight of the blanket, the last trailing edge of whatever the mind was turning over before it let go. All of it was real. But the relay was already closing. The hippocampus was already beginning its transition toward its own sleep phase work, the consolidation of everything that came before, not the encoding of what was happening right now. The buffer held the last moments for its brief window. The window closed, the contents went nowhere. And so in the morning, there is no record of any of it, not because you forgot, but because the system that would have written it down had already moved on to other business before the last sentences of the day were even finished. And here is the hinge on which the whole thing turns, the philosophical hinge that changes the shape of the question when you look at it from the other side. The absence of a memory is not evidence of the absence of an experience. This is a statement that sounds almost too obvious to be interesting, and yet it is the thing most people fail to apply to the moment of falling asleep. Because when we find no memory there, we assume nothing was there. We assume the slate was blank. We assume we went, at some point, directly from awareness to nothing. From the last remembered thought to the first woken up one, with no gap in between. And what Henry Molaison showed the world, quietly and over decades, was that there can be a great deal of lived experience on the other side of a silent memory. That the lights can be on without the recorder running. That something can happen to someone without leaving any trace in the system that keeps track of what happened to them. When the encoding system closes for the night, the experiencing system has not necessarily closed. Consciousness fades, yes, but it fades on its own timeline, its own separate curve, and that curve does not match the encoding curve. The recorder switches off before the lights do. The lived experience of the descent into sleep, the dreamy drift, the strange images beginning to form. The loosening grip on the thread of waking thought, all of it continues after the recording has stopped. It happens to you. It is real. You are there for it. And you will find no record of it in the morning, because the system that would have kept the record had already signed off. Now here is where it becomes genuinely strange, where it becomes, if you are still awake enough to feel it, something close to wonder. In the year 2000, a group of researchers at Harvard Medical School, led by Robert Stickgold, ran an experiment with Tetris. Tetris, the old video game with the falling, rotating, coloured blocks that you fit together as they descend. The game that once lived in millions of pockets, on small grey handheld screens, and that a great many people have spent more hours playing than they might comfortably admit. Stickgold and his team had participants play the game for extended periods across multiple days, and then, as the participants were falling asleep, the researchers woke them during the early hypnagogic phase, that drowsy, not quite asleep state, and asked them what was happening in their minds at the moment of waking. What were they experiencing? What were they seeing or sensing in that barely there space just before sleep took them? A large number of the participants reported seeing Tetris blocks. Falling, rotating, colourful blocks, fitting themselves together in the dark of the mind's eye. The imagery of the game replaying itself in the transition zone between wakefulness and sleep, which is interesting enough on its own, but is not by itself the thing that matters most about this study. The researchers also ran the same experiment with a group of people who had severe amnesia, people with hippocampal damage, people who could not form new episodic memories, who, like Henry Molaison, could not hold a new experience past the brief window of working memory, who would not be able to tell you the next morning that they had spent the day playing a video game because they would have no memory of having done so. These people played Tetris as well, hours of it, across multiple sessions. And then, as they were falling asleep, the researchers woke them in the same early hypnagogic state and asked the same question. The amnesic participants reported seeing Tetris blocks. They could not remember playing the game. They did not know they had ever seen it. If you had asked them that morning what they had done the day before, Tetris would not have appeared in any answer they could give. The game was not in their memory, but it was in their imagery. The visual experience of it, the falling shapes, the rotating blocks, had been processed somewhere other than the hippocampal memory system, somewhere that the amnesia had left intact, and that processing was playing back at the edge of sleep in exactly the same way it played back for the participants who did remember. The system that generates experience at the edge of sleep, the system that creates the imagery and sensation of the hypnagogic state, does not need the hippocampal memory system to operate. They are genuinely separate. One runs without the other. The dying brain of the day replays the pattern of what it has processed, and it does this whether or not the person can remember ever having encountered that pattern. The imagery is not a memory, it is a residue. It is the echo of experience in a system that operates independently of the machinery that would need to be running for any of it to be remembered. Let that settle for a moment if you can. This is the load-bearing fact, the one that supports everything else, the one that the whole structure of the answer rests on. There is a system in your brain that generates experience, that creates imagery and sensation and the felt texture of being alive right now. And there is a separate system that records that experience. That takes what is happening and writes it into the story of your life, the narrative you carry forward and can retrieve and recognize as your own. Under ordinary waking circumstances, both systems run together so seamlessly that they seem like one thing. But at the edge of sleep, in the zone where the hippocampus is beginning its nightly transition and encoding is failing, the recording system goes offline while the experiencing system keeps going for a while, and during that window, things happen to you. Real things. Vivid things, sometimes, the falling blocks of a game you played, the soft drift of a thought that has lost its tether, the beginning of an image that doesn't quite make sense and doesn't need to, all of it happening in a room where no one is writing anything down. And the amnesic participants who arrived at that threshold with nothing in their episodic memory of the game, who had no stored record of the falling blocks to draw on, still saw the falling blocks. Because the imagery system doesn't draw on episodic memory, it draws on something else, some processed residue of experience that lives outside the hippocampus. In the systems that handle the deeper patterning of repeated activity, and it generates the experience whether or not the record exists. Which means that what is happening to you right now and what will happen to you in the next minutes as you cross your own threshold into sleep is not recorded absence. It is not nothing. It is experience in a system that has simply closed its books for the night, still running, still generating the felt texture of the descent, still present in whatever sense presence means when the recorder is no longer there to confirm it. You are there. The experience is real. The record just won't show it, because the record is already elsewhere, already doing the night's other work. Already running the ripples and the replays and the slow transfer of today into the permanent structure of who you are. There is something quietly extraordinary about that, if you let yourself feel the shape of it. The most intimate edge of your experience, the nightly passage between your waking self and your sleeping self, the border crossing you make every single night of your life, exists entirely outside the story you keep about yourself. It is the one event that happens to you that is yours alone, that no one else was present for, and that even you will never witness, because the witness had already stepped away. And if that sounds like loss, like something taken, it might be worth pausing here and turning it slightly, because from another angle it looks like something else entirely. It looks like the brain making a quiet and functional choice, setting aside the record of the transition so that the record of the day can be preserved. The hippocampus is not idle while you sleep. Far from it. While you lie still and drift, the sharp wave ripples are running, the hippocampal neocortical dialogue is active. Today's experiences are being processed and sorted and gently filed. The system that would have recorded your fall into sleep is busy doing something more important, doing the work that makes sure the morning version of you wakes up with the accumulated weight of the life that preceded it, with the things you learned and felt and decided, with the people and the places and the ongoing narrative of a life being lived. It signed off on encoding new experience so it could do the deeper work of consolidating the experience that was already there. The recorder went quiet at the threshold, not because it failed, but because it had other things to attend to. Working memory, that brief and transient buffer, held the last seconds of your waking life for as long as it could. It held the shape of the last thought, the awareness of the room, the feel of the pillow, perhaps the last fragment of whatever you were trying or not trying to think about as sleep approached. It held those things in the way it holds everything, lightly, temporarily, as a relay and not a record, with no guarantee of transfer and no means of preservation if the transfer doesn't come. And in the ordinary course of a night, the transfer didn't come. The hippocampus was already elsewhere, the consolidation machinery was already running. The window of working memory held its contents for its few seconds, and then it released them the way you release a breath, without drama, without ceremony, without any signal that something was being let go. The last thoughts of the day dissolved not into forgetting, but into never being recorded, which is a different and in some ways quieter thing. And you woke up this morning with no knowledge of any of it. You woke up with the last memory you formed before the hippocampus fully transitioned, some thought or sensation from earlier in the descent. Some moment that was still within range of encoding when the relay was still open, and that moment became your marker, your last known position before the night. And everything between that marker and sleep was simply absent. Not hazy, not distorted, not partially recalled, absent, a clean edge. And the clean edge is not a sign that nothing was there. The clean edge is the signature of the shutdown itself, the precise point where the recorder stopped, preserved in its very blankness, the boundary made legible by the fact that nothing crossed it. Henry Molaison lived with clean edges everywhere. Every conversation he had ended at a clean edge when the person left the room. Every experience he had, however vivid and real and fully felt in the moment, ended at a clean edge when it moved beyond the reach of working memory. He was not broken, exactly, though of course in clinical terms something had been damaged and removed. He was, in a stranger sense, a demonstration. He was living proof of a seam that the rest of us carry hidden. The seam between the system that has the experience and the system that remembers it, stitched together so perfectly under ordinary circumstances that it takes something as stark as surgical removal to make the seam visible. And what you have in common with Henry Molaison every night of your life is this: for the duration of the descent into sleep, for those unrecorded seconds and minutes at the edge of the dark, the seam in you opens slightly too. The stitching loosens, the two systems diverge, running at different speeds now, on different tracks, and the experience continues a little further than the record does. And by morning the seam has closed again, and you carry on with no idea that it opened. You have done this tens of thousands of times. The dissociation logic holds every night, every person, every life. Absence of memory is not evidence of absence of experience. Your fall into sleep is not a blank, it is an experience in a system that closed its books. It is a vivid, real, ongoing, unretrievable thing, and the proof of it is in the amnesic patients who saw the Tetris blocks they didn't remember seeing. The falling shapes playing out in a mind that had no record of ever encountering them, the experience outlasting the memory, the imagery running in the system that was never removed. And this is not a poetic flourish or a metaphor made to comfort you, though perhaps it does offer a kind of comfort. The comfort of understanding rather than the softer comfort of being told not to worry. This is mechanism. This is the literal architecture of what the brain does at the threshold, verified in the laboratory, documented in the clinical record, proven in the strange and careful decades of work that researchers like Brenda Milner and Suzanne Corkin spent with one patient, in the sleek and rigorous experiment that Robert Stickgold and his colleagues ran in Cambridge with falling coloured blocks and participants who couldn't remember ever having seen them. The comfort, if comfort is the right word, is not invented. It is discovered. It comes from the same place all good reassurance comes from, which is from actually looking at the thing and finding out what it is. What it is this. The brain runs two systems where we assumed it ran one. The system that experiences and the system that records are genuinely, measurably, demonstrably separate, as Henry Molaison showed the world for 50 years. At the edge of sleep, those two systems diverge by a gap that varies from seconds to several minutes, every night for every person, and in that gap, experience continues without recording. The recorder switches off before the lights do. The moment of falling asleep is not forgotten. It is not blurry, not half-remembered, not lost to the softness of sleep the way a dream might be lost by mid-morning. It is simply not in the record. The record ends where the recorder stopped, and the recorder stopped a little before the experience did. And the dark tale of the descent, those last minutes at the threshold, belongs to the experiencing system alone, running in the quiet after the writing has stopped, laying down no trace, leaving no evidence of having been there, which is not the same as not having been there at all. And now that we understand what the machine is and how the two systems work, we can go a little further in. We can go down into the threshold itself, into the strange zone where encoding fails and experience continues, and look at what actually lives there, what the mind finds in the gap between recording and sleep, what it does in the unretrievable dark. Because the amnesic patients who saw the Tetris blocks were in a specific state when they saw them. A specific, nameable, briefly studiable state that has its own character and its own strange properties, and that is, for most people who pass through it every night without knowing, the least visited and most consistently denied territory in the whole landscape of human experience. It has a name. It is called hypnagogia. And we are going there next. But before we do, just rest here a moment with what we've covered. You are lying somewhere warm. The room is quiet, or nearly so. And somewhere in the neural architecture of the mind that is registering these words, there are two systems running alongside each other in this very moment, one experiencing the sound of the voice, or the feel of the words, and one writing the record of having experienced them. Right now, both are running. Right now, you are both having this and keeping it. And sometime soon, the recording system will begin its transition. It will move toward its other work. The buffer will hold whatever you are thinking for its brief window, and then the window will close, and experience will continue for a little while in the system that doesn't keep records, and you won't know any of it happened. And that is not a failure. That is the machine working exactly as it was built to work, exactly as it has worked every night of your life, in every person who has ever slept. The most repeated unwitnessed event in the history of human experience, happening again tonight, as it always has, quietly and without ceremony, in the dark. Hypnagogia is not sleep. That is the first thing to understand about it, and it is also, in a way, the strangest thing about it. It is the territory between sleeping and waking, the corridor that connects the two, and it is neither one nor the other, but something genuinely distinct, a state with its own phenomenology, its own electroencephalographic signature, its own strange rules about what the mind can and cannot do while it is there. Most people pass through it every night of their lives. Almost none of them remember it. And that forgetting is not incidental. It is, as we are beginning to understand, written directly into the nature of the place itself. The word comes from the Greek. Hypnos, the god of sleep. Agogos, leading toward. Hypnagogia, the state that leads you toward sleep. And the name, for once, is accurate. It is a threshold, and it has the quality of thresholds. It is neither fully where you came from, nor fully where you are going, and if you stop to examine it, the act of examination tends to end it. You are, in hypnagogia, in the process of leaving wakefulness, which means you are in the process of losing the very capacity that would allow you to observe the leaving. The doorway closes as you walk through it. This is not a poetic description. It is a functional one. On an electroencephalograph, the device that reads the brain's electrical activity through sensors placed along the scalp, the same machine used in every sleep study, the machine that has been measuring this transition for decades, the approach of hypnagogia has a particular fingerprint. Wakefulness, when you are relaxed and still with your eyes closed, is characterized by what researchers call alpha waves, a smooth, rhythmic oscillation running at somewhere between 8 and 13 cycles per second. The electrical hum of a mind at rest, but still present, still at the surface. You can think of alpha waves, if it helps, as the low idle of an engine that is not yet switched off. The car is parked. The engine is running. Nobody is going anywhere yet. And then, as you drift, as the threshold approaches, the alpha waves begin to break up. They fragment. They become less regular, less sustained, and into the spaces they leave, a slower oscillation begins to assert itself. Theta waves. 4 to 8 cycles per second. Slower, more rolling, less crisp. Where alpha had the quality of something maintained, something held, theta has the quality of something releasing, something that has stopped trying. This transition from alpha to theta is the electroencephalographic signature of the exact moment relaxed wakefulness becomes sleep. This is what stage N1, NREM stage 1, looks like from outside. From inside, it looks like nothing at all. Or it looks like something that will not be remembered. The eyes do something characteristic during this transition as well. In wakefulness, the eyes move quickly and purposefully even beneath closed lids, tracking the interior landscape of thought. But as N1 arrives, the eyes begin to move differently. Slowly, rolling, gently, without purpose or direction. A motion that has sometimes been described as similar to watching something drift on the surface of very still water. The technical term in the clinical literature is slow rolling eye movements, and they appear on the records of sleep studies as a reliable marker of the transition, where you see the slow rolls alongside the fragmenting alpha and the rising theta. You know you are watching someone enter the doorway. You know you are watching someone begin to leave. And here is the thing about N1 that matters more than anything else, for the question we have been turning over all this time. N1 is the stage people most reliably and sincerely deny having entered. If you wake someone from N1 sleep, from theta wave, slow eye roll, fully EEG-defined stage 1 sleep, and you ask them, gently, what was just happening, a substantial portion of them will tell you they were awake. They were thinking about something. They were lying there, listening. They were not sleeping. And they are not being difficult or imprecise or overly pedantic about the definition of sleep. They mean it. The experience from the inside, the felt experience of N1, does not carry the felt quality of sleep. It does not announce itself. It comes without the familiar subjective shift that the word sleep implies, without the sense of a door closing or a light going out, and so the person in it continues, for as long as it lasts, to classify themselves as awake. They are wrong. The EEG says so, calmly and without ambiguity. But the experience says otherwise, and experience is all they have access to, because the record is already offline. This is the doorway, a place you walk through every night, that you are in right now if you are drifting, that leaves no mark and no memory of its own passing. A place where your brain is measurably doing something different from wakefulness, but where the subjective report continues to say, I am still here, I am still awake, nothing has happened yet. But things are happening, and some of them are remarkable. Hypnagogia is not a quiet state. It is strange and vivid in its own way, though it is strange and vivid in a way that mostly escapes the record. People who are caught in it, which is to say, people who are woken from it at exactly the right moment and asked immediately to describe what was happening, report imagery that has a dreamlike quality but that feels different from dreaming, clearer. In some ways more fragmentary, not sustained by a narrative the way a dream tends to be, but populated with images that arrive without invitation and that often have nothing to do with anything the person was thinking about beforehand. A face, a landscape, a pattern that seems to mean something, a voice saying a word that makes no sense but that feels, in the moment, important. Sometimes the imagery is geometric, repeating shapes, grids, shifting patterns of light and color that arise from the visual system running without external input, the retina dark but the cortex still generating. Sometimes it is more complex, a scene glimpsed from an angle, a person doing something inexplicable, a fragment of music that does not exist. The precise content varies enormously from person to person and night to night. The fact of the imagery does not. And the imagery is, in a way, the proof. Because the imagery is happening, the visual system is doing something, the experiencing brain is active and generating a world for itself, and all of this is happening in the zone where the encoding system is no longer reliably present. The lights are on. The camera is off. Whatever is happening in hypnagogia is being experienced by a system that is not, in any durable sense, keeping notes, which is why the ordinary sleeper, on waking in the morning, finds no trace of it, not forgotten, as we have now said more than once, but never stored. The imagery dissolves not because it fades from memory, but because it was never transferred into memory in the first place. In the year 2021, a team of researchers at the Paris Brain Institute, led by a neuroscientist named Delphine Oudiette, published a study in the journal Science Advances that did something unusual and technically difficult. They tried to study hypnagogia in real time. The challenge, as anyone working in this territory knows, is the catching. To study what happens in N1, you have to let people approach it naturally, monitor them closely enough to know when they have arrived, and then either wake them immediately to get a report or give them something to do while they are there, which is itself a precarious proposition. Because doing something tends to wake you up. The state is fragile. It is like trying to examine a soap bubble without touching it. Oudiette and her colleagues found a way. They had participants hold a light object in their hand, loose enough to drop as muscle tone decreased, sensitive enough to register when it fell, and while the participants drifted towards sleep, monitored continuously by EEG, they were given a specific problem, a numerical task that contained a hidden rule, a shortcut that, once seen, made the problem trivial. Most people, given the problem in full wakefulness, would grind through it the long way and never notice the shortcut. The question was whether something about the hypnagogic threshold changed that. What they found was this: participants who were caught specifically in N1, in the theta wave, slow roll, stage 1 window, before crossing deeper into sleep, were markedly more likely to find the hidden rule than those who remained fully awake or who had crossed into stage 2 sleep. The hypnagogic threshold, that liminal sliver that most people deny ever visiting, carried something, a specific capacity. A loosening of the ordinary constraints of waking thought that made unexpected connections more available, that let the mind find a route through the problem that the fully alert, fully categorizing, fully on guard waking mind would not naturally take. This is a striking result. It suggests that hypnagogia is not simply a diminished version of wakefulness, not just the same mind with less power, but something qualitatively different. A mode of processing that has its own signature and that may produce kinds of insight that full wakefulness resists. The fragments and strange images of the hypnagogic state may not be random noise from a system powering down. They may be the output of a mind briefly freed from its usual habits, making associations it would otherwise suppress, finding paths between ideas that the alert executive function would dismiss before they had a chance to develop. But here is the thing that matters, the thing that loops back to everything we have been building. The participants in Oudiette's study, who had this insight, who found the hidden rule, who touched something in the hypnagogic state that the waking mind had missed, most of them did not remember having been there. The researchers could see, on the EEG, when each person had drifted into N1. They could see the theta waves, the slow rolls, the markers of the transition. They knew who had crossed the threshold. The participants, for the most part, did not know. They could not verify their own passage through the place where the insight had occurred. The catching had to be done from outside, because from inside there was nothing to catch, nothing that would survive the transition back into wakefulness and leave a usable trace. And so we have this image, a state where the mind may do some of its most creative work, tucked behind a door that does not open from the inside, accessible only to researchers with an EEG and a willingness to pull people back out of it at the exact right moment. A territory that most people visit every night and cannot confirm they have ever been in. The most consistently denied room in the house of consciousness, and possibly one of the more interesting ones. There is an older story, less rigorous but worth telling as what it is, an anecdote, a piece of reported historical behavior that speaks to this same territory. Thomas Edison, the inventor and engineer, is said to have known about the hypnagogic state and to have worked with it deliberately. The story, repeated in various forms, is this. Edison would rest in a chair when he needed to think through a difficult problem, and he would hold steel balls in his hands, loosely, with metal pans placed on the floor beneath them. As he drifted towards sleep, as the muscle relaxation of N1 onset set in, and his grip began to loosen, the balls would fall, striking the pans with a sound loud enough to rouse him instantly. He would then, still in the haze of the transition, still close to the state he had just been pulled from, reach for whatever imagery or idea had been present in the moments before waking. This story is not verified in the way that the Oudiette study is verified, and it should be held with that in mind. It is told as an anecdote, a piece of lore around a man who generated a great deal of lore. But it is a story that, whether or not it is precisely accurate in every detail, describes something recognizable in light of what we now know about the state he was apparently trying to access. He was trying to catch himself in hypnagogia. He was trying to engineer the catching that the state otherwise resists. He understood, or intuited, that the threshold had something the fully alert mind did not, and he was trying to use the physics of falling objects as a timer set to the exact moment of release. Whether or not he succeeded, whether or not the imagery he retrieved in those jolted wakenings was as useful as the story implies, the attempt itself is a kind of tribute to the strangeness of the territory, that a person would devise a mechanical apparatus to interrupt their own sleep onset in the precise hope of capturing something from the unremembered zone. That a person would take seriously, without any of the neuroscience we now have to explain it, the intuition that something worth having was happening in the place they could not remember visiting. Something falls. Something jolts. And this brings us to the other thing that happens at the wake to N1 boundary, the thing that more people have noticed and more people remember than almost any other feature of the transition. Not because it is common, though it is extremely common, encountered by most people, reported across cultures and throughout the recorded history of sleep observation. And not because it is frightening, though for some people, the first time, it is frightening enough to make them sit up and turn on the light, but because of where it arrives and what it does to the recording problem we have been examining. It is called a hypnic jerk, also a sleep start. In the clinical literature, a myoclonic jerk, a sudden, involuntary contraction of muscle, typically involving the whole body or the legs, that arrives without warning at the edge of sleep and throws the person briefly, violently back into wakefulness. You have had one, almost certainly more than one. The sensation, a falling, usually, a sudden physical conviction that the body is dropping from some height, combined with a muscular contraction, sharp enough to be startling, arrives without context and without cause, seems to come from nowhere, and then is gone. The heart beats a little faster, the eyes are open, the room is there. And after a moment the body settles again, and if sleep comes back, it comes back without any note of what just happened, because what just happened happened at the exact boundary where notes are no longer being kept. Why it happens is a question the science has not fully settled, and honesty requires acknowledging that clearly. There are accounts, physiological accounts, that have been put forward, and they are reasonable, but they are not proven causal mechanisms. They are best explanations, currently held, pending better data. One account focuses on the brainstem. As the body descends into sleep, the brainstem oversees a systematic reduction in muscle tone. The muscles need to relax, the postural effort of being awake needs to release, and the brainstem's transition machinery manages that release. One account holds that the hypnic jerk is a misfire in this process, the transition machinery running too fast or out of sequence, producing a sudden discharge that activates the muscles briefly before the inhibition catches up. On this account, the jerk is a glitch in the handoff, a brief electrical exclamation point written by the machinery as it changes state. Another account points to the sudden loss of muscle tone itself and to what the brain does with it. In wakefulness, the body's postural muscles are constantly engaged, constantly providing the signals that tell the brain that the body is upright, supported, safe. As sleep onset approaches and those muscles relax, those signals cease or diminish sharply. And there is a possibility, not certain, but plausible enough to be offered, that the brain interprets this sudden silence, this sudden loss of the usual postural feedback, as the beginning of a fall. Not metaphorically. Literally, the system that monitors physical position receives information consistent with the body losing support, and it fires a correction, a reflex contraction, as if to catch itself. The sensation of falling that accompanies the jerk on this account is not added to the experience afterward as an explanation. It is the experience. The brain is, briefly, genuinely convinced it is falling, because the signals that would tell it otherwise have gone quiet. Both accounts are coherent. Neither is conclusively proven. The honest position is that the hypnic jerk is a real, well-documented, physiologically produced event whose precise mechanism remains a matter of ongoing investigation. What is not uncertain is when it happens, at the wake to N1 boundary, in the same window where encoding fails. The jerk arrives at the threshold. And now the peculiar thing, the thing we seeded earlier and can now pay off. The hypnic jerk is one of the few sleep onset events that most people do remember. In a domain defined by the vanishing of experience, by the systematic failure of encoding to capture the transition, the hypnic jerk survives. It persists into memory. People wake with the sensation still vivid, the fall, the contraction, the jolt, the rapid heartbeat, and they remember it the next morning. It appears in conversations, in the accounts people give of their nights. It is, in this sense, the anomaly, a sleep-onset experience that makes it through. And the reason it makes it through is precisely because it interrupts the process. The descent into sleep, the slow withdrawal of the encoding system, the quieting of the hippocampal machinery, the hypnic jerk throws a stone into that water. The sudden muscle contraction, the physical startle, the spike of alert awareness that follows, these are enough to pull the system back from the threshold, to briefly re-engage the waking state, to bring the recorder back online for a moment. You are, after the jerk, momentarily awake. You are momentarily in a state where encoding is possible. And so the jerk itself and the sensations immediately surrounding it get written. Not the descent, not the hypnagogic imagery that may have been present just before, not the moment of actual transition, just the jerk and the waking that follows it, because the waking is what made recording possible again. This is the answer to the open loop we set in motion earlier. That falling sensation that jolts you awake arrives at the exact moment your brain stops recording, and it may be the only reason you remember any part of falling asleep at all. The jerk remembers itself, if that can be said without too much metaphor, by being the very thing that undoes the forgetting. It arrives at the boundary where experience stops being stored, and it is stored because it throws the boundary open again, briefly, just long enough. Every other feature of the descent, the fragmenting alpha waves, the slow rolling eyes, the drifting theta imagery, the loosening grip of ordinary thought, passes without trace. The jerk alone has enough force to interrupt its own vanishing. It is the one thing at the edge of sleep loud enough to wake the recorder. And it is worth pausing here, in the calm of this image, to notice what it implies about the vast architecture of experience that surrounds it. If the hypnic jerk is memorable specifically because it interrupts the shutdown, then what this tells us is that the shutdown is otherwise total. The system is not leaking. It is not a slow fade where some things get through in diminished form. Whatever falls below the threshold of the jerk, whatever is quieter, smoother, less disruptive, finds no purchase in the recording apparatus. The descent, for all its strangeness and all its imagery, is a closed room. The only exit is back through the door you came in. There is another feature of this transition that complicates the picture in an interesting way, and it is called local sleep. And what it adds to the account is the observation that the brain does not transition from wakefulness to sleep as a single unified system. It transitions unevenly, region by region, each part of the neural architecture moving on its own schedule, with the result that at any given moment in the early stages of the descent, some regions may already be in a sleep-like state, while others are still doing things that look, on the EEG, broadly wakefulness adjacent. This is, in some ways, unsettling as a thought. It suggests that the border between sleeping and waking is not a clean line drawn across the brain at a single moment in time, but something more like a front, a gradient, a condition that is more complete in some places than in others as it advances. The sensory cortex. The regions that process incoming sound, incoming touch, incoming light, may still be responding to stimulation for a brief window after the memory systems have already begun their withdrawal. which means, in principle, that there is a slice of time, seconds perhaps, during which you can hear something, during which the sound enters the brain and is processed by the auditory system, and you will have no memory of having heard it. Not because you were not listening, but because the part of the brain that would have made the hearing into a stored event had already moved on to other business. This is a strange image. You hear a sound you will not remember hearing. The sound enters, is processed, is in some sense experienced, and then it is gone. Not because it faded, but because nobody wrote it down. The recorder is not in the room anymore. The experience is still happening in one part of the building, and the record keeping is already happening in another. And the two have lost the connection that would have allowed the experience to become a memory. Memory fades first. Not awareness, not sensation. Memory, the recording system, is the first part of the waking apparatus to let go, and it lets go before the rest has finished, and in the gap between the two, in the seconds or minutes between the moment the recorder goes quiet and the moment consciousness follows, is where the great unremembered descent takes place. The body is still warm, the imagery is still arriving. The ears can still, perhaps, catch a sound, and none of it will be there in the morning, because the machine that would have made it permanent, clocked out before the night, was finished. This is local sleep, and it is the final texture of the doorway, not a single threshold crossed at a single moment, but a zone of uneven transition, where different systems move at different speeds toward the same destination, and where the loss of memory precedes, by design, the loss of experience. The brain does not go to sleep. The brain goes to sleep unevenly, incompletely, in parts, with the recording system leading the way and the experiencing system trailing behind it into the dark. And so this is where we stand, pausing for a moment in the middle of the descent, in the zone we have been exploring together, the hypnagogic corridor, with its theta waves and its slow rolling eyes, and its strange fragmentary imagery that will not survive the night. The Paris Brain Institute participants solving hidden rules in a state they cannot confirm they ever occupied. The Edison anecdote, held loosely, of a man with steel balls and metal pans trying to catch himself at the exact boundary, the hypnic jerk arriving like a stone thrown into still water, interrupting the transition loudly enough to leave a trace, and the brain, all around and beneath everything, advancing unevenly towards sleep, with the memory systems already pulling away from the shore, while the rest of the mind is still looking back at the receding lights of the waking world. The doorway is stranger than it looks, and it is stranger than it looks because it is never remembered. The very quality that makes it a subject of study, its consistent, systematic resistance to being stored, is also the quality that keeps it feeling, to the person passing through it every night, like nothing at all, like a gap, like a moment where something should be and nothing is. But something is. Something is there in that gap, and we have now been given enough of a map to understand its shape, even if we cannot see it directly. We know what the EEG shows. We know what the researchers find when they interrupt the process at exactly the right moment. We know why the jerk survives and why the rest does not. We know that the state has a name and an electroencephalographic signature and a measurable cognitive signature, and that it is visited every night by every person who sleeps, and that almost none of them will ever know what it was like to be there. Almost none. Because occasionally the catching happens accidentally, occasionally some disruption, a sound from outside, a shift of position. The hypnic jerk itself, a door closing in another room, pulls a person back from the threshold at precisely the moment the imagery is at its most vivid, and for a fraction of a second, before the system has fully returned to wakefulness, before the encoding machinery has caught back up, the person is balanced on the exact edge, not asleep, not yet fully awake, and in possession of whatever the hypnagogic state was generating a moment before. Sometimes they manage to hold it, a fragment, an image, a feeling that something important was there. And then it is gone, dissolved in the returning wakefulness the way a dream dissolves on waking, leaving only the awareness that something had been present and the inability to say what it was. This is the nature of the territory. Not darkness, not silence, not the absence of experience, but experience of a particular and peculiar kind, running in a system that is not recording it, generating imagery and sensation and perhaps even insight in a brain that is on its way to somewhere else and will not be stopping here long enough to make a note of the visit. The most populated, unremembered place in the geography of human consciousness. A room everyone enters, a room no one can describe from memory. And we are not yet finished. Because we have covered the doorway, and we have covered the mechanism, and we have covered the jerk and the imagery and the uneven retreat of the recording system, but we have not yet come to the thing that may, for many people listening to this, be the most personally resonant part of the whole account. We have not yet come to what happens when the door has closed and the night has passed and the person opens their eyes in the morning, convinced, absolutely, sincerely, with complete subjective certainty that they did not sleep at all. So let us go there now. Let us follow the account all the way to the morning and to the moment of waking, and to the thing that so many people carry quietly through their days without ever having a name for it or a mechanism to hang it on. There is a particular experience that is more common than most people realize, and more instructive than almost any other fact about the sleeping brain, and it goes like this. The night passes. The hours accumulate. The body lies still. And somewhere in the early hours, or at the first greying of the window, the person wakes, or surfaces rather, because the return to wakefulness is often as gradual and unsteady as the departure from it, and their first conscious thought, formed before they have even moved or opened their eyes, is a familiar one. It is a thought that lands with the flat certainty of something observed rather than inferred. I didn't sleep. I was awake all night. I lay here for hours and it never came. The certainty is real. That needs to be said plainly, and it needs to be said first, because nothing in what follows is meant to dismiss or minimize the experience of lying in the dark for what feels like hours without rest, without relief, without the mercy of unconsciousness. The experience is real. The suffering is real. What is not reliable, what the science has patiently, repeatedly, and in some ways remarkably demonstrated, is the report. The account of the night that the brain generates on waking is not a recording of the night. It is a reconstruction. And it is a reconstruction assembled by a system that in many cases had already stopped recording before the night was very far along at all. This is the thing that was seeded earlier in this account, the second open loop, the one about the people in sleep laboratories who will swear to your face they did not sleep a second. It is time to pay that off now, not as a curiosity about other people, as a fact about a mechanism that lives in every brain, including the one listening to this. Sleep state misperception. Paradoxical insomnia. These are the clinical names for it, the names that appear in the International Classification of Sleep Disorders, The names that sleep clinicians in American sleep labs have worked with for decades as they sit on the other side of a one-way window watching a polysomnograph trace the night of a person who is absolutely certain they are not sleeping. The electroencephalogram, the EEG, does not have opinions. It reads electrical activity across the scalp and translates it into a line that moves in characteristic ways when a person is in stage N1, and different characteristic ways when they are in stage N2, and different ways again in the slow-rolling depths of stage N3. The machine has no investment in the outcome. It simply reports what is there. And what is there, in study after study conducted in sleep laboratories across the country and around the world, is sleep. Documented. EEG-confirmed, unmistakable sleep. In people who will wake from it and tell you with complete sincerity, with the absolute subjective certainty of someone reporting a lived experience, that they were not asleep at all. The researchers in these studies have a protocol for this moment. They wake the person, carefully, at a defined point during what the EEG shows is clearly sleep, often early sleep, often N1 or N2, the lighter stages, and they ask them, "Were you asleep just now?" And a meaningful fraction of the time, the answer is no. Not a hesitant no. Not a puzzled no. A confident no. I was awake. I was lying here, thinking. I was aware of everything around me. I was not asleep. And the trace on the polysomnograph says otherwise. This is not a rare disorder. It is not something that happens only to a small and unusual subset of people with a particular neurological condition. It is a predictable consequence, the downstream expression, the natural output of the very mechanism this whole account has been circling. The hippocampal encoding system powers down before the cortical awareness system does. Experience continues past the point of recording. So what the brain has available to reconstruct the night is not the night itself, but the night as recorded. And the recording has gaps, some of them large. Some of them spanning the majority of what actually happened. The morning's certainty of wakefulness is assembled from those records and only those records. The unrecorded hours are, to the reconstructing brain, simply absent, and absence, to a brain trying to account for the night, looks like wakefulness. Not like sleep that was forgotten. Like wakefulness that was had. The report of a sleepless night, in a meaningful number of cases, is generated by a system that had already stopped recording. Let that settle for a moment. It does not mean the distress is manufactured. It does not mean the fatigue is invented. It does not mean anyone who has ever woken feeling unrested should conclude that they secretly slept beautifully and have nothing to worry about. Fatigue is real regardless of its source, and anyone whose sleep is genuinely causing them suffering deserves to talk to a clinician who can conduct a proper sleep study and read the actual data. That is the honest frame, and it is worth being clear about it. But the mechanism itself, the gap between the subjective experience and the objective record, that is common. It is documented. It is expected, and it follows almost mathematically from the asymmetry that has been the spine of this account. Because here is the thing about N1, the first stage, the doorway stage, the stage described earlier as the place where the theta waves begin and the slow rolling eye movements replace the alert gaze and the alpha rhythm of relaxed wakefulness starts to break apart and dissolve. N1 is the stage from which people most reliably deny having slept. Not N3, the deep, slow wave valley where a person could sleep through a moderate earthquake. N1, the lightest, shallowest, most easily interrupted stage. The one that feels, subjectively, from the inside, barely different from lying still with your eyes closed and your thoughts drifting. And N1 is exactly the stage where encoding is most compromised, the stage where the hippocampal machinery has begun to stand down, the stage where experience and recording have already begun to diverge. So, when a person lies in the dark for what feels like hours of frustrated, futile wakefulness, cycling through anxious thoughts, watching the numbers on the clock advance, convinced that sleep is simply refusing to come, some portion of that time, and sometimes a very large portion of it, is time spent in N1 and even N2, lightly and lightly and lightly asleep, in a state that generates no strong memories and no clear subjective sense of having been unconscious, and is therefore reconstructed in the morning as continuous wakefulness. Not because the person is wrong about their experience, but because their experience in that stage is genuinely ambiguous and their recording of it is genuinely incomplete. This is why sleep onset latency, the time it actually takes to fall asleep, one of the measurements a clinical sleep study produces, is so reliably and so systematically misestimated by the people whose sleep is being measured. People overestimate how long they lay awake before sleeping. They overestimate it consistently, and the overestimation tends to be largest early in the night, when N1 arousals are most frequent, when the brain is cycling back and forth across the boundary, dipping into light sleep and pulling back into something that feels like wakefulness. Each dip leaving little trace, and the brief return to something more alert feeling like a continuous thread of wakefulness rather than a punctuated series of crossings. Think of it this way. Imagine you were trying to measure how long it took you to cross a particular threshold by relying only on your memory of what happened on your side of the threshold, and imagine that your memory became progressively less reliable the closer you got to the threshold and completely failed right at the point of crossing. You would have no reliable record of the crossing itself, or of the moments just before it, or of how many times you approached and retreated before finally going through. Your estimate of when you crossed would be drawn from the last clear memory you have, which might be 15 minutes before you actually crossed, or 30 or more. You would systematically overestimate how long you waited, not because you were inattentive, because the recording stopped before the crossing happened. That is precisely the structure of the sleep onset latency estimation problem. The last reliably encoded memory precedes sleep onset by some margin of time, seconds at the least, minutes often, and in the context of a difficult night, perhaps considerably longer. And everything between that last clear memory and the actual moment of crossing is a dark tale, a stretch of lived time that will contribute nothing to the morning's reconstruction of the night. The dark tale. It is one of the more quietly strange facts about human consciousness that it has one. That every night, behind the last thing any of us remembers, there is a period of real experience, thought, sensation, perhaps imagery, perhaps the particular dreamy drift of hypnagogia, perhaps the sudden jolt of a hypnic jerk that occurred and was not written down. The last thing you remember is not the last thing that happened. It is the last thing the recording system was able to capture before it went offline. Everything after that is a gap in the archive. Not evidence of nothing having happened, but evidence of the recorder having stopped. This is the philosophical hinge that H.M. Henry Molaison made so vivid in a waking context. He was conscious, he was present, he engaged with the world in real time. He had experiences, moment to moment, that were genuine and felt, and none of them were being transferred to long-term storage. His absence of memory was not evidence of the absence of experience. It was evidence of the absence of encoding. The one does not imply the other. And what is true of HM? In a dramatic and irreversible way, is true of every sleeping person in a nightly and temporary way, at the boundary, in the minutes where the recording system winds down before the experiencing system has quite finished its day. You have heard this boundary by its clinical name, NREM Stage 1, N1, the doorway. But perhaps the better metaphor is this, a tape that has run out. The experience keeps unfolding in real time. The machine keeps running. But the tape is gone, and whatever happens after the last frame is not captured anywhere and will not be found in the morning's inventory of the night. Now, the consumer version of this gap. There is a particular kind of modern disorientation that has grown up alongside the proliferation of sleep-tracking devices, the rings and watches and bands that sit on a wrist or a finger through the night and report in the morning a summary of the night's architecture. Stage percentages, scores, hours of deep sleep, hours of light sleep, hours of REM, presented on a small screen with the same confidence and precision as a weather forecast, coloured graphs suggesting a detailed and authoritative account of what the sleeping body did while the sleeping mind was elsewhere. And sometimes, often enough that clinicians have noticed and named it, the number on the screen and the number in the head are very far apart. The ring says 7 hours, the person says 0. Or the ring says good sleep, high score, green, and the person wakes feeling as though the night was one long stretch of restless, half-aware lying still. This is not primarily a story about the limitations of consumer devices, though those limitations are real and documented, and clinical polysomnography, the gold standard, the full electrode array, the measured breathing and eye movement and leg movement and brainwave, read by a trained technician, does frequently disagree with what a consumer device reports. That disagreement matters, and it means that a consumer sleep score should always be held lightly, as an estimate, not as a clinical fact. But beneath the device accuracy question is something older and more fundamental than any piece of technology. The gap between the ring's 7 hours and the felt 0 was there long before the ring existed. It lived in the space between the EEG and the morning report in sleep laboratories decades ago. The ring is not creating the gap. The ring is just making the gap visible in a new way, to people who never had access to a comparable measurement before. Researchers have given a name to a related phenomenon, orthosomnia. The word was coined, Barron and colleagues, to describe the anxiety generated in some people by their tracker data, not the relief of data, not the reassurance of a good score, but the new category of worry created by an imperfect number being taken as authoritative. The person who was not previously anxious about sleep becomes anxious about their sleep score. The person who slept reasonably now lies awake, checking their ring's response time sensitivity. The device meant to improve sleep awareness becomes a source of sleep disruption. This too is a downstream expression of the subjective-objective gap, just arriving from the opposite direction. But the core of it, the thing underneath the tracker and underneath the morning report and underneath the sleepless night certainty, is the mechanism, the two systems, the recorder and the experiencer, the hippocampal encoding process and the cortical awareness that continues past it. The fact that the most intimate event of every night is, by design, unrecorded from the inside, not by accident, not by malfunction, by the ordinary, unremarkable, every-night operation of a brain doing exactly what it is supposed to do. And here is where the reassurance lives, if you are someone who needed it tonight. Not in the insistence that you slept, because a voice in an audio file cannot know what happened in your particular night, but in the mechanism itself, in the knowledge that the report the brain generates about the night, including the report of a sleepless, restless, frustrating night, is assembled from partial data, from an archive with gaps, from records that stopped being made at some point before the night was over. That report is real. It is what the brain has. But it is not a transcript of the night. It never is. And in the category of nights that feel worst, that feel most devoid of sleep, that feel most like an unbroken vigil of wakefulness, those are very often the nights where the gap between the record and the reality is largest, where the most was lived in N1, lightly and incompletely encoded, and the most has been reconstructed as wakefulness by a brain that had run out of tape. If there is genuine and lasting distress about sleep, not the occasional bad night, but a persistent pattern that affects the days, the right direction is toward a clinician, toward a proper sleep study, toward a polysomnograph that reads the actual electrical activity without relying on the reconstruction. That is the honest advice, and it belongs here. But for the person lying in the dark tonight, wondering whether they are broken, whether something is wrong, whether they are the only one who never seems to catch sleep arriving, you are not broken. The mechanism you have is the mechanism everyone has. The event you cannot witness is the event no one witnesses. The recorder going offline before the lights go out is not a flaw in your particular machine. It is the way the machine works. And now we have come, finally, to the place where all the facts in this account converge into a single image. Not a diagram, not a graph, not a number on a screen. An image. There is a person lying in a room in the dark. It might be any room, any city, any moment in any of the decades of a life. The person is in the borderland. The alpha waves of relaxed wakefulness are thinning. The theta rhythm is beginning, slow and rolling, 3 to 8 cycles per second, the EEG signature of a brain releasing its grip on the day. The eyes, beneath their closed lids, are moving slowly, not the rapid darting of REM dreaming to come much later in the night, but a long, slow, oceanic roll, like the eyes of someone watching something very far away and very peaceful. The muscles are releasing their tone. The hands that were perhaps slightly tensed are softening. The jaw is unclenching in the slow, unnoticed way that happens every night and is never noticed until it has already happened. In the hippocampus, deep in the medial temporal lobe, curved and compact, a structure that has been encoding the day's events since the first moment of waking. The sharp wave ripples are reorganizing. The busy dialogue between the hippocampus and the neocortex, the back and forth that is the mechanism of consolidation and memory, is changing in character. The new information encoding mode is stepping back. The system that has been writing the day is putting down its pen. And the person is still there, still present, still having thoughts perhaps, still dimly aware of the weight of the blanket, the temperature of the room, the sound of whatever sounds the night holds. Still, in some attenuated and drifting sense, conscious, but no longer being recorded. The experiencing system running. The recording system winding down. The gap, measured in seconds or minutes, opening between the two. And into that gap falls everything. The exact moment of the transition. The thought that was forming and will never be finished. The image that was beginning to assemble from the fragments of the day, not a dream yet, not the narrative REM dream that comes later, but the stranger, looser, more fragmentary imagery of hypnagogia. faces and places and sensations that belong to no particular story and obey no particular logic. Perhaps the falling sensation, perhaps the sudden muscle release that the brainstem reads as a fall and corrects for with a jolt that briefly throws the system back toward waking, the hypnic jerk, the startling return. One of the very few events at the boundary that survives into memory precisely because it interrupts the very process that was erasing it. Perhaps just the slow dissolution of coherent thought into something that is no longer quite thought, not yet quite dream. The particular quality of experience that is available only at this exact boundary and is, by the structure of the system, almost never available to memory. All of it. Every night. For everyone. You have done this more than 25,000 times if you have lived a life of ordinary length. 25,000 crossings at a minimum. Perhaps 30,000, perhaps more. Each one a genuine event. Each one experienced in however attenuated and drifting away by the brain that was there. Each one unrecorded. Each one unavailable in the morning. Each one contributing nothing to the archive of the life except the absence of itself, a gap in the record, a dark tail behind the last remembered thought, the nightly evidence of the recorder switching off before the lights. It is, when you hold it at the right distance and in the right light, one of the stranger facts about the experience of being a person. Not threatening, not a sign of malfunction, simply strange, in the way that the deepest facts about consciousness tend to be strange when you look at them directly rather than accepting them as background furniture of existence. We measure lives by their memories. We understand ourselves through the stories we are able to tell about the time we have spent alive. And every night, quietly, without drama, the recording system hands back the day's work and goes to sleep itself, a little before you do. The person and the recorder part ways. The night takes the person somewhere the recorder cannot follow. And in the morning, the recorder wakes first, assembles what it has, and presents a reconstruction that begins not at the moment sleep arrived, but at the last moment before the pen went down. This has been happening to every human who has ever lived, for as long as humans have lived. Long before sleep laboratories, before EEG machines, before polysomnography. Before the International Classification of Sleep Disorders, before Robert Stickgold and his Tetris players at Harvard Medical School, before Delphine Oudiette and her colleagues at the Paris Brain Institute caught people in the sliver of N1 and found the hidden mathematical rule waiting there in the hypnagogic dark. All of them slept this way. All of them fell through the same unrecorded doorway. All of them woke with the same partial archive, the same reconstructed night, the same gap behind the last clear memory where the actual moment of the crossing had been and was not. The most repeated unwitnessed event of a human life. Not an eclipse which comes rarely and requires planning. Not a surgery which happens once or twice, if at all. Not even a birthday which comes once a year. This crossing, every night, in every bedroom, in every climate and every culture and every century. Witnessed by no one from the inside, unmemorable by design. The one experience that is guaranteed and universal and entirely unavailable for review. And there is something that might be restful in that, if you are willing to find it. Not the anxiety of a gap in the record, but the quietness of an event that does not require your attention, does not require your vigilance, does not require you to catch it or document it or hold it or remember it. It will happen without your cooperation, and it will leave no evidence of having happened, and the morning will arrive on the other side of it, regardless of whether you noticed the crossing or not. The brain that falls asleep has been designed over an enormous span of time to fall asleep without your help. The hippocampus knows when to put the pen down. The theta rhythm knows how to begin. The slow, rolling eye movements know their own cadence. The hypnic jerk, if it comes, knows how to startle and release and settle again. None of it needs witnessing. The room is quiet now, in the way that a room gets quiet when the account of a thing is nearly finished. The things that were mysterious at the beginning of this night have not been made less real. The mechanism is still strange, the gap is still there, the transition still happens in the dark, unobserved, every night, in every house, with sleeping people in it. But perhaps it is a different kind of strange now. The named kind. The accounted for kind. The kind that can be carried a little more lightly because its structure has been described. You know now why you cannot remember falling asleep. Not as a vague intuition, not as a half-recalled fact, but as a mechanism with a name and a shape and a history of careful documentation. The hippocampus encoding the day's events, and the cortex continuing to experience the night, and the gap between them opening at the boundary, and the dark tail of unwritten seconds trailing behind the last remembered thought. You know why someone can sleep for hours and wake up certain they did not sleep, and why that certainty is not dishonesty but the predictable report of a system that ran out of tape. You know why the falling sensation jolts you back, and why it is the only part of the crossing you sometimes carry back into the morning. You know what hypnagogia is, and what the theta waves are doing, and why the Paris Brain Institute had to wake people up to find them there. You know why your sleep tracker and your body sometimes tell different stories, and why neither is lying, and why the gap between them is older than any piece of technology. You know. And the knowing is done for tonight. If you feel moved to share where in the world you are listening from, whether it is a city you have lived in for decades, or a place you arrived at recently, a house or a flat or a room somewhere still strange to you, I would genuinely like to know. The comments are there, and I read them, and there is something quietly wonderful about knowing the geography of who is falling asleep to this kind of account. And if you found something in this that you will carry into tomorrow, or if this is the kind of slow, careful company you find helpful at the edge of the night, then there are more of these here, waiting for whenever you want them. Stories about what the brain does when it thinks no one is watching. Accounts of the mechanisms running quietly in the background of being a person. But that is for another night. Tonight the account is complete. The recorder has put the pen down. The questions that arrived with you at the beginning of this have been answered as fully as the science allows, and perhaps a little more gently than you expected. You have done enough for one night. More than enough. Whatever was weighing on the day, whatever remained unfinished, whatever was too large to resolve before the dark, none of it requires your attention now. It will wait. It has always waited. And the night, which is already well advanced around you, is asking for nothing except that you be still inside it. Let the last thought go, the one that is still trying to form. Let it dissolve in the way that thoughts dissolve at this particular boundary, not with effort, not with force, but with the simple removal of resistance. The theta rhythm will find you. It always does. The slow rolling of the eyes will come in its own time. The hippocampus will put the pen down at the moment that is right, and the experiencing system will continue a little while longer in the warmth and the quiet, and then that too will give way. And the crossing will happen, as it has happened every night of your life, without your witnessing it, and without your needing to. You're moored safe in the sleepy harbour, now. Drift off,